Many Americans work on a daily basis to be able to pay for the basic necessities of life. Whether that be food, housing, or transportation, that's a very important thing that we all take a part of. And ultimately, that's something that we need to get by. But some of us Americans still try to do that, but do it on a much lesser wage. Ultimately, that is the federal minimum wage. And a lot of those people struggle to pay for the basic things in life, and sometimes can be even impoverished in this situation. With that, the federal minimum wage is something very important that all of us Americans are a part of. And ultimately, a lot of us Americans have some very staggered opinions on that. But for me personally, after living off of the minimum wage, but also looking at some various articles and also some journals, I feel like I'm well qualified enough to give you some unbiased information today and give you an idea of where we're at with the federal minimum wage. So with that, today I'm going to tell you about the current status that we're at with the minimum wage. Second of all, I'm going to tell you about the reasons as to why we should raise it. But then third of all, I'm going to tell you the reasons why we should keep it where it's at. So to start, let's get to the current situation that we're at with the federal minimum wage. Now, according to the U.S. Department of Labor, the minimum wage is meant for covered non-exempt workers under the Fair Standards Labor Act. And basically, this is meant for people who live off the minimum wage to be able to, live a good life, and not something super lavish, but be able to live a good, decent life and without having to struggle with that. So to give you some history, Franklin Delano Roosevelt actually signed that very act in 1938. And basically his intentions was for Americans to live a normal American life under a just wage. And basically that way they could have a decent lifestyle and not be able to scrape by. So fast forward, according to Investopedia.com in 1968, actually the federal minimum wage was worth 26% more than it was in 2018. That means that what people were making on the minimum wage in 1968 is actually technically, by inflation standards, worth more than what Americans were making 4 years ago and even today. So with that, the federal minimum wage for a lot of Americans just doesn't always cut it. And because of that, well, right now we're at $7.25 across 24 states. Of course, some of those other states also include, like California and New York, who have significantly raised their minimum wage to $15 an hour, but many other states still stay around the $8 to $9 or $10 an hour rate. So with that, actually, if you work 40 hours a week, actually you will only, and you do that for a solid year, you will only make $15,080, which is actually below the poverty line. And according to that, the federal poverty line is actually $18,310. So literally, if you take no days off and work for the entire year on a full-time job, you're still below the poverty line. So with that, now that I've talked to you about the current situation that we're at, I'm going to talk to you about the reasons as to why we should increase the minimum wage. First of all, according to the research facility at Drexel University, actually, if we increase the minimum wage to $15 an hour, 10.5 million families will actually be helped and ultimately be taken out of at least one government assistance program. Ultimately, that will help those families lose the security that they had in those and be able to be a bit more fiscally responsible on their own, but then also help out the taxpayers, so then they don't have to pay as much for those programs. Another big part of that too is that the morale of these workers will actually go up. Ultimately, if you don't have as much of a worry for money because your wages have been increased, well, ultimately that's going to help you out at home, but that's also going to help you out at work, and your morale is going to be boosted. And another thing is too is that when you go to work and your morale is boosted, well, then the production goes up, your productivity increases, and ultimately that's better for yourself, that's better for the company, and it's also better for the economy as a whole. So now that I've talked to you about where we're at with the minimum wage, I've also talked to you about the reasons as to why we should raise it, but I'm going to talk to you about the reasons as to why we should not raise it. Ultimately, even though the idea of getting more wages sounds nice, there's some problems to that. And ultimately, first of all, according to the CBO, if we actually raise our minimum wage to $15 an hour federally, actually 1.4 million Americans are going to lose their jobs over the next 4 years. And ultimately, that's a very big issue. And with that, impoverished families who are dealing with that very thing, well, now employment's going to go up, so that's going to mess with their lives as well, and ultimately the lives of many Americans as a whole. Another issue too is that being that even if we raise the minimum wage, things are still going to get more expensive, and that's going to make the people who are in poverty in a worse situation than they were before. First of all, if you do increase the minimum wage, that also increases inflation, which makes everything else more expensive. And because of that, anything from basic food to products, services, whatever that may be, are going to be less affordable. And since you're in a situation where now people are getting laid off and there's less of an opportunity for employment, now those families that were already living off the minimum wage might have been cut off first, because a lot of minimum wage employees are the first to be cut off in that kind of situation. So because of that, that actually puts them in a worse spot. So overall, I've talked to you about the current status that we're at. I've also talked to you about the reasons as to why to raise it, but also the reasons as to why to not raise it. So in conclusion, the issue of the minimum wage is very tough, and of course there are many positives and many negatives on both sides, but ultimately today I hope I have given you a good, proper set of facts for both sides, and I hope that you can leave today knowing a little bit more about the federal minimum wage and how you want to go about it from now. Thank you.